education system of Ecuador. When I first started this project, I was interested in Ecuador because that's where my mom was educated. She grew up as a missionary's kid in Ecuador in the 80s. What I quickly discovered, however, is that a lot has changed in Ecuador since that time, and the nation my mom grew up in is very different from the nation today, due to some very recent political changes. So I'm going to talk about that, and I want you thinking specifically about how a country's geography can change its education system, but also how a country's political stability can change that same education system. So, without further ado, here's education in Ecuador. I want to talk a little bit before we get too far into it just about Ecuador today, where we find it, and the people we find within it. So, for geography of Ecuador, Ecuador is located in northwestern South America. Actually, if you look at this map, it's going to be right here. And it's called Ecuador because of its position on the equator. It's called Ecuador for its position on the equator. It has two main urban centers. You see there in that mountain range, its capital, Quito. And it also has the urban center on the coast of Guayaquil. So it's actually rather unique as a nation in that regard. The mainland of Ecuador is divided into three main parts, and these are strong cultural and geographical divisions. On the west side, we have La Costa, meaning the coast. That mountain range of the Andes Mountains cutting through, that's called La Sierra. That's where you'll find Quito. And El Oriente is over on the east side, the innermost part of the nation. When we're talking about size and population, Ecuador is a pretty small nation. It's about 17,299 square miles and a population of around 17.6 million. As I said, it has those two major urban centers, but overall, the density of Ecuador is going to be about 165 people per square mile. For comparison, the US has about 91 people per square mile. So what that means is Ecuador is almost twice as dense as the United States in terms of population. Now, I said the mainland because Galapagos actually exists as a part of Ecuador as well. Yes, that Galapagos, those Galapagos Islands that Chuck Darwin went to learn about finches and evolution. I mainly am going to be talking about the mainland in this presentation, but I did want to mention that part of Ecuador because before starting this, I didn't even know that was a part of Ecuador. It has many fewer schools than the mainland and a much lower population, but it's still part of the nation as a whole. So let's talk about the racial makeup of Ecuador. The majority of the nation is mestizo, which means they're of mixed European and indigenous heritage. And that's because of some colonization that we'll get into later. But as you can see on this graph of, of ethnicity, which I found on Britannica, there's only about 5 ethnicities represented here. In reality, there are over 12 strongly defined regional groups and at least 14 distinct indigenous peoples. That's that Amerindian slice of the pie that you see there. So in other words, if you're going to ask someone from Ecuador how they identify, they're much less likely to say, oh, I'm Ecuadorian, and much more likely to say, I'm Southern Quechuan. Please don't mistake me for the coastal Quechuan or the northern Quechuan or the central Quechuan. And please don't mistake the Quechuan for any other indigenous tribe. So we have some very distinct people groups, which the nation on the whole is trying to create more of a national identity. That's a struggle that we'll see moving forward, but Ecuador is very much trying to build more of a more of an identity as Ecuadorians in its culture. So to get into that, let's talk about its political history. Incans and Spaniards and coups. Oh my, there's quite a bit to cover here. Very briefly, the pre-colonial. People have been living in Ecuador for a long time. That statue on the far left is from roughly 2 or 3,000 BC. It's some of the earliest human form art. We know that in the 1400s, there were a lot of warring chiefdoms kind of sprawling out over that area until eventually those chiefdoms were taken over by the Incans in the 1470s, which are illustrated in that central illustration. And eventually the Incans were colonized by the Spaniards, by Pizarro, in the 1530s. And we'll see all these people groups represented in different ways as the nation progresses. Now, after Ecuador gained its independence in 1830, there were some very early strong moves to try and build its education system. Most of that was Roman Catholic in nature, and we're going to see the lingering effects of that heritage as well. One important thing to know with the educational system of Ecuador is that universities were formed first. And so everything else in Ecuador is kind of built around getting people to the universities that already exist in the nation. So as I said, a strong focus on university formation and preparation. Now, in the last 10 or 20 years, there's been a lot of social upheaval. I just want to illustrate a little bit of that. There was a President Mahuad. He was overthrown by a coup in the year 2000 when he tried to change Ecuador's currency to the US dollar. And 3 years later, a leader of that coup, Gutierrez, was then elected president in 2003. The new constitution, its newest constitution, is as recent as 2008 under the president Rafael Correa, who's pictured there. Now, is this the only new constitution that Ecuador has had? No, this is Ecuador's 20th constitution since gaining its independence in 1830. So as you can imagine, a lot of change, a lot of upheaval, and we can see how that lack of stability has influenced the culture and also the education system of this nation.